Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I know it's been a long time, we'll talk about that later, but today I've got the awesome cavity creep and we're gonna go over something that you guys have been asking for a long time, is a kind of condensed idea of tips about gardening and landscape, and that's what we're gonna do. So I've got, like I said, I got cavity creep. Say hi.
Hey guys! Hello everybody! So excited to be here, guys.
This guy is awesome. If you enjoy the video today, go check out his stuff because it's really, really helpful. If you're new to Planet Zoo, or if you've had it for a long time, if you bought the game and then shelved it because it was too difficult, try these tips and you might actually have some fun in it.
Now is a better time. The best time.
Now is the best time. Yeah, exactly. All right, so let's get started.
This tip is going to be very great. This is a tried and true method. It is always useful, very powerful. Bury your trees to make shrubs. Let's get into the game to show you guys what we're actually talking about here. We're going to go to nature, and then we are going to scroll down, and let's just pick up this beech tree. We're going to hit shift, and then we are going to pull it beneath the surface here. You see, now it looks like an actual bush, doesn't it? You place one down, you place another down, you place a third one down, and you zoom in. It looks so good. God, it looks so good. That's crazy how good that looks. And you could do this with all sorts of trees. So here's another black poplar. We do it with another one. We kind of mix it up a little bit. Oh yeah, now the colors are starting to differ. Oh man, that looks so good.
First thing I want to talk about today is all about terrain. And you can see in this garden that I've got here, this is the lovely Planet Botanic Botanical Garden. Oh geez, say that 5 times fast. I've got a massive terrain shift here that you can kind of see envelops the space pretty well. Well, you can do that on a macro scale too when we're talking about smaller beds and landscape designs. And so I'm going to climb over, or claw over to this side, where again, I've got much shorter kind of terrain shifts, but I still have the terrain varied up and down. So let me show you what this looks like. So I've got this little plot here, and we're gonna use that same first trick that Cavity taught you, which is burying the plants down nice and deep for some shrubs. And maybe I'm gonna bury some grasses, just have it a very simple palette here. Now you can see that this looks pretty good, but it is very flat, so I can see right through the design. And if I even put in a tree, you really don't get any depth in this. And it's a little bit more evident when you don't have the long grass, but I'm not gonna mow all this down right now. Now what you can do to kind of combat that is to use a technique that you actually will see in garden design. And it's something that we do every year to cover our beds and make sure our soil doesn't deplete. It's called mulching. And over time, you're going to end up with this hill in the middle of mulch or leaf material or any sort of thing. And it's a tiny little berm that kind of forms. Going to make this bed seem a lot more grounded to the terrain, which is exactly what you want. Especially when we're talking about a large bed, you don't want to necessarily fill it up, but you still want it to be varied and interesting. That's what this does.
Really excited about this next tip. It is really great. So you are going to be massing plants for a more organic look and feel. So basically, if you just went in and you took an elephant ear plant or a Dutchman's brief, any kind of plant, right, and you just placed one down, it's gonna look really weird. It's very small compared to some other things, and it just doesn't look real. But what you can do is you can take, let's use elephant ear as a great example. So you place one. If you just had one here, it would look so strange, right? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna hold shift so that we can get off of that axis. We're gonna rotate it, we're gonna place another one down. And then let's come over here, get another guy, and then maybe rotate it a little bit more. Let's rotate him a little bit more over this way, sink him down into the ground to hide some of those leaves. You're starting to get a better feel. This just looks more organic, more natural, more lifelike than just the small little thing that we had. And then of course, let's have 1, 2 in the center. There you go, guys. So to give you comparison, doesn't the one on the right look so much better than the one on the left? It's crazy how much of a difference there is between the two. And all we did is we just added a few more plants to make it just stand out that much more.
Next tip is fairly easy, but the older the material is, likely the larger it is. So in this area of the garden, I've got a very old trail, and you can see that it's pretty well grown in. You can see the ponderosas here and the palms and stuff like that. And when you get down into it, it's quite lush. So this area has been grown in, the material is very large. When we're talking about something new, we're coming over here. And it really hasn't had a chance to grow in yet. This is something that was recently installed. It's got some low growing plants. You can tell that there's just an age difference, and that's what can create some dynamic design in your projects. An easy way to achieve this effect is to take things and plant them as if you were actually planting out a garden bed, and I'll show you how we do it typically. We work in triangles just like this with some space, because we know that the plant is eventually going to grow into that spot. And then we might have something that's a little bit larger, so maybe a candelabra. But we're still going to choose the young one. And maybe this specimen tree is going to sit right here. We're going to do the same with the sage. We're going to assume that these are individual plants that we planted. So we're going to do a drift of sage here. And if I want to make it look a little younger, I can make it shorter like that, sink it in. And I always try and work in odd numbers just because it looks a little bit more natural. So now that looks like they have been individually planted in from their pots. I'm going to choose the small diamond leaf willow. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to leave some space in between so that it doesn't look like it is completely filled in. And so now you have this. I'm actually going to take this and I'm just going to fill it in with some of this. So this looks like a really young bed. You can see that everything is pretty well separated. Now I'm going to show you what this bed's going to look like when it gets a little bit more established. So there you go. That's the difference between a new and an old or established. So even though the material hasn't necessarily gotten much bigger, not as big as something like evergreens and palm trees and stuff like that, you can still have the same effect. If you want something to look young and new, give it space. If you want it to look older and established, let that space fill in naturally.
Alright guys, this next tip is a really great one. Paint your terrain. Don't just treat it like you're putting down hard rocks, right? Don't just take the hard rock texture and just place that down. Paint it, add layers, do blending, try to do your best to make it look as natural as possible. And then you can come back in later and you can use grass like moss, or you can use sand as like a dry filler. Let's just show you guys what we're talking about here. So we've got some rocks laid down. We've got some temperate rocks laid down here. We're gonna go into the terrain, right? We're gonna pull up the terrain around and inside of these rocks. So we're gonna come up on this side, especially this side. We're gonna pull it straight up, and then I want to kind of hide this. I want to kind of blend this so that you don't see where these connections are, but we are only covering up as little as possible. So we've got it all blended. That looks fantastic. So we're going to start painting this. Let's give it a base coat of the dirt, that's the heavy soil here. And then from there, we're going to add in, we've got 30% and 4, so we haven't changed anything. We're going to add in the light soil now, just gently clicking that all the way around. And then from the top, we're going to add in the heavy rocks, a few clicks here and there, a few clicks here and there, some on the top more. And then we're going to do smooth rocks to give it this, yes, give it a little bit more heavy rocks. There we go. Okay, that's perfect. Now, the last thing that I want to do, we're going to add a little bit of moss, because if it's facing in this direction all the time, right? So we're going to bring it down to a 2. We're going to make the intensity about a 10. And then we're just going to paint very gently, very, very gently, right about there. Right about there. There we go. And that is it, guys. That looks so much more natural. It looks very beautiful, and you get a little bit of a varying texture, varying differentiation of your textures, of your plants, and of your rocks. It just looks so good.
This next tip definitely comes from the world of garden design. It's something that I can't remember if it might have been Monty Don from the BBC. He kind of exclaims that you really should only have, when you're talking about a space, maybe 5 to 7 different plants, and that can make up a garden. And it seems like a preposterous idea, but what I think he's trying to say is that you don't necessarily want to throw everything in the kitchen sink into a large garden design, or else it's going to look very spotty, and it's not going to meld very well. Here in the water garden, I've got some really cool different textures going on, but I've used them in such a way so that they continue. There's one here in the front. This is the grass texture. I've got it repeated right here. I've got it repeated right here. And you see it pop up in a bunch of different spots. I've got this eucalyptus, so it pops up here and pops up here. I've got this lovely red leaf tree here and here. And so even though I probably used more than 7 plants in this garden, I've only used about 5 or 7 different textures, and that is the main difference. So let's say we'll make a California palette, what I think is a California palette. So I'm going to start with palms, because it's just what's all around. I would go with what's called a Washingtonia robusta, but I can't do that at the moment because we don't have it. So I'm just going to make a cluster of palms. Another tree I see a lot in a Southern California landscape is big ficus. We don't have it in the game, but Wimba does just fine. It has that really large presence, and you can get a pretty large tree too. So I'm going to add that in there. This Joshua tree, and you don't have to necessarily use it as a Joshua tree. Remember from tip 1, you can bury it into the soil, and you can have yourself a nice little cluster here. Then we need something a little drier. So let's go with this is a nice tree for little drier scapes. So we're at 1, 2, 3, 4. We're at 4 different trees right now. Let's finish off with something else that's a little dry, some sage. And let's expand it to 2 more. So let's add a tree and a shrub. And for the tree, I'm actually going to add a ponderosa. The reason being is that they are all over Southern California, even though it's not a tree you would normally see. And then I'm going to add this as the last bit, this little creosote bush. So what I've created is a palette of 7 different plants and 7 different textures as well. This kind of becomes my default design for lush, deserty, drought tolerant in California. So in this case, I've got the manzanita, I still got the yellow bush, the sage, and the blackthorn, along with some bigger trees. I've custom made one here. It's supposed to be a California live oak. And then this one, this marula tree, always works really well as a fill. So if you were to count out the different plants, you probably have more than 5 or 7. But if you look at the textures and the colors, you have a really homogeneous scene because it is very limited in that respect.
And one very, very simple tip here for you guys that all of the pros do. This is really what separates the little leaguers from the pro MLB players, guys. This is the big leagues, okay? The basics of a budget. You don't just play this game, right? And even if you're in Sandbox, you don't just play this game by placing a bunch of stuff down. You need to be thinking about how much would this cost in real life. So if you have a lot of flowers, you have a lot, basically the more colors that you have, the more expensive it's going to be to maintain and to place them, to plant those flowers and to place them. So let's show you an example here. So if we had, for example, we had a bunch of flowers, right? We had a bunch of flowers up here, and then we come in and we do a aloe vera so that we get a different color. We come back in through, come back through, come back through. We do one more. We got another color here for daisies. We do a line of daisies, and then we come back in. We do a line of sea hollies. To make them a little bit thicker, we place 2 of them at a time. One more, and okay, so this is going to be very, very expensive versus just doing alpine, 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 alpine because it's all green, right? And then one color, right? And then we come back through with alpine again. And then we just do it a little bit smaller with these guys. There you go. That is it. That is it. So this is going to be much cheaper than this, right? In the actual budget. So for high throughput areas, like at the entrance of your park, you would maybe want to have a very high budget. But as you're getting into the park, you're getting into the nitty gritty, you want to start thinking about lowering your budget down because not as many people are coming through here. It doesn't matter as much. It doesn't need to be as beautiful in the bathrooms as it does at the entrance of your park, right? So this is the basics of budgeting, and it makes everything just, it really brings a cohesion to your park that just wasn't there before.
All right. right, here you can see my laboratory of custom plants that I've got going on here. This is my kind of testing ground where I kind of throw some things together, see if it looks good, and if it does, it usually makes it out. And it can seem pretty daunting to kind of make your own foliage, but I'm going to show you something really, really easy. So let's start with the African branches. This is an awesome piece that they gave us, and I tend to use it a lot. So I'm going to do this just so that I have enough height, kind of move it in together. If I need to thicken out the trunk, I can always do that just by massing these two together. So I've created a nice new trunk for this custom plant. It's gonna look ugly before it looks better. Let's just get that out of the way. And I want everything to be at kind of a nice 45-degree angle. That's generally how these branches will come out. They'll notch out. They don't typically hang like this. There are some trees that do that, but for the vast majority, they're going to want to come up like this. And we're not going to create, branchlets and everything like that. It's not super important to get the same aesthetic of the custom tree. And that looks pretty good. I might do another one here, just to balance out the canopy. I'm going to turn this into an item, and then we're going to go into, there's a few different branch or shrubs that work really well. Arrowwood is one of them. The Bramble 3 is really useful, almost looks cloud pruned. Crowberry bush is a great one for this as well. And then there is one more that is super effective, Scaevola. So, a few options for leaf textures. I think I'm going to go with, let's go with the Scaevola. I'm going to take them to the tips. And then what I'm also going to do is weep them a little bit. So move them so that they make this kind of umbrella shape. And then I'm going to take this and I'm going to replicate it and move it to somewhere else on the tips. Kind of drop it down a little bit and do the same for the third one. And then I kind of step back and see, is this tree looking pretty good? And it, mostly is. I think this could be probably pushed up a little bit. This is where you get into the fine tuning. So that looks a little bit of a flatter canopy, and that works really well. You look at it from all sides. If one side looks a little bit too loose like this, I'm going to add another set of leaves, drop them even more so that they really look like they're heavily kind of coming down. All right, and there you go. You have a new tree that didn't exist before you made it custom. And this is going to work really well in all of your habitats and stuff like that. It's a smaller tree, generally, the custom ones are. And so you can fit it into a much smaller spot where a normal tree would not fit. And it can be really effective as a kind of specimen tree. All right, this is going to be a pretty easy one. I know I've said that they're all pretty easy, but this one's really easy. The idea of 2s and 3s, evens and odds. In nature, most things are not going to be equal or symmetrical. You will have a hard time finding anything out that is going to emulate what happens in formalistic design. So, this is a perfect example here. You can see that the front of this building has 2 of these palms. It's because it's framing the architecture very symmetric. And then you also have these 2 diamond leaf willow trees, again, framing the exit there. You've got these kind of set up in a formal pattern around here. You've got these 1, 2, 3, 4. And 3s and odds seem to do better in terms of naturalistic design. So in here, I've got 3 of these trees set up in here. And same on the other side, even though it's still following a somewhat symmetrical design. The 3 trees just seem to make the whole design feel a little bit more organic. So an easy way to wrap this up is evens, go for formalistic design. Odds, go for naturalistic design. Taking this a step even further, you can put plants, bushes, flowers, shrubs, grasses on all different angles and come up with really cool, interesting effects. And so you can see my test here. This was to try and create a lollipop lilac. Kind of works. It's kind of ugly. I didn't really like it, but it's still here, so maybe I'll fix it in the future. This is the one that I think came out really well. This is a dead birch connected to a, let me see, reed, common reed on the bottom there as the kind of beard of the plant. Whoops. And then you've got this ball of elephant grass. And so I'll show you how to make this in particular. We'll start with the ball of grass head. So there we go. We start with one, and then I'm going to immediately invert it onto the other side, just like that. And you can see that even the way that the game renders it is quite different. So you end up with these nice highlights on the top, and you end up with a lot more shadow on the bottom. And that is what makes these look a little bit more compelling instead of looking like an absolute mess. So I just turn that into a group, and then I'm going to quickly turn this into a cross. I'm going to do it again, except on the diagonal. Now I've got the beginnings of a sphere, and I'm going to take it overhead, and I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to do it again to make a 8-sided cross. So I've got a sphere of elephant grass, which needs to be a little bit randomized. So I'm going to take out the bottom here. I'm going to take out a few fronds here and there. So it looks a little bit, ratty in places and a little fuller in places. And that's kind of what you want. You want that natural randomness. And let's add the beards. This is just all the dead stuff that comes off the top of the plant. And if you need, you can always turn them out a little bit, make the beard a little fuller. All right, and then all we need is a support. So I'm going to put in broken because that comes up with all the awesome trees. And then if I feel that I've cut a little bit too much out, I can always go back in and fill where I think I've taken too much to kind of make it a little bit more sphere-like. And there you go. A completely custom tree. Doesn't exist in the game. Made entirely out of elephant grass, reeds, and a broken Scots pine or ponderosa pine trunk. That's what ends up becoming of these things. This is all nettles inside of a broken birch. That's what this is. This is all corkwood trees inside of a trunk. Or this lovely eucalyptus. This is diamond willow, along with some trunks stitched together with some of those like African vine pieces. And that's how you can get some really cool different shapes into your projects. Well, I think that's gonna about do it. If you liked what you saw today, you know what to do. Big thanks to Cavity Creep for doing this series and just putting out some really awesome material in general. It can sometimes be hard to find really good tutorials and just simple tips to kind of get you back into the game. I think he's awesome. You should check him out if you haven't. And we might be seeing some more videos on the channel here pretty soon. I don't really know how this thing is going to shake out. But I am still interested in Planet Zoo, and I've got a lot of projects to go. So I hope to see you in whatever the next one is going to be. And I hope you guys have a great weekend. See you later.